In the broad history of the Western mystery traditions, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn stands as a beacon, lighting a darkened period of religious moral constraints and growing secularization, which threatened to plunge the world into a colorless sleep of automatism and meaninglessness, completely severed from the spiritual traditions of antiquity. This incredible organization and its initiates reinvigorated the spiritual life of Europe in the Victorian and Edwardian eras of England and created a nourishing environment for poets, actors, writers, artists, and intellectuals of all kinds to develop into some of the most influential figures of the past several centuries. It served to preserve the traditions of magic, divination, and spiritual alchemy for generations to come, reminding us that while the greatest teachers and most devout practitioners, while in a physical body, remain all too human, that there is still real magic in this world. I'm Ike Baker, and this is Arcanum. He has never been at any time, either in personal or in written communication with the secret chiefs of the order, he having either himself forged or procured to be forged the professed correspondence between him and them, and my tongue, having been tied all these years by a previous oath of secrecy to him, demanded by him from me, before showing me what he had done or caused to be done, or both. In February of 1886, Freemason, student of ancient philosophies, and coroner for the City of London William Wynne Westcott claimed to have received certain documents from another prominent Mason, the Reverend Adolphus Frederick Alexander Woodford. These documents were a collection of folios on which were written the structural outline of certain rituals, correspondences, and courses of study. However, the documents carefully concealed this information within a simple cipher, a polyalphabetic method of encryption invented by the abbot and mentor to Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, Johannes Trithemius. These documents would come to be known as the Cipher manuscripts, and laid out the foundations of the Order of the Golden Dawn, including 5 rituals and the collection of information to be memorized, often referred to as the Knowledge Lectures. By 1887, Westcott had decoded the manuscripts and wrote to fellow Freemason Samuel Little Mathers, asking him to assist in formulating the information contained within the manuscripts into a coherent, workable system of ritual initiation and study. We have no doubt a rich treasure in poor old Woodford's manuscripts. I hope you will accept co-equality with me and write it up with all your erudition if I will do a simple translation of the cipher. We must then choose a third and endeavor to spread a complete scheme of initiation. Woodford died in December of that year after a foot injury which caused septicemia. They would find their third or co-equal third chief in the accomplished Mason William Robert Woodman. The cipher manuscripts were indeed worked up by the young translator Sam Mathers into what is now the system of rituals most well known as the Golden Dawn system. However, along with the cipher manuscripts came a document which had the name and address of a Fräulein Sprengel in Germany, with whom Westcott began a purported correspondence. It may be said that the finding and translating of the cipher manuscripts in 1886 and 1887 was the genesis point of the Golden Dawn. But where did they come from? It is well at certain times to consider our status as Rosicrucians and to remind ourselves of the origin of the society to which we belong, the original paths laid down by our founder, C.R., and to take a note of kindred societies of Rosicrucians. We must not be surprised that extant published records are very scanty, for the purpose of the Rosicrucians was to be unknown to the people among whom they lived. The institution of Freemasonry had long been a forum, if perhaps in its peripheries, for the communication and exchange of occult and esoteric ideas and motifs, such as alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, and Rosicrucianism. Indeed, Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism have been twin threads in the transmission of the Western esoteric traditions of antiquity, attracting many luminaries from the intellectual society of Europe since the 17th century. In the early 1600s, a series of manifestos were anonymously published, comprising what would come to be known as the Rosicrucian manifestos. These documents were a series of pamphlets outlining the existence, beliefs, mythos, and purpose of an invisible brotherhood whose leader, Frater CRC, was a pious and learned initiate of many lands, who founded the order in Germany in 1313. The Fama Fraternitatis, the first of three such documents, was published in Germany in 1614. This explained the backstory or legend of the Invisible Brotherhood and its founding, detailing the story of CRC, traveling all over the known world of his time, seeking and being granted initiation and tutelage in the arts of magic, philosophy, and science. It also detailed the construction of a meeting place called the Domus Spiritus Sanctus, the House of the Holy Spirit, which was their headquarters, as well as the vault or tomb of CRC, within which he was buried, and which place lay hidden from all eyes for 120 years before its accidental discovery by a brother of the fraternity. These anonymous manifestos seized the collective imagination of European society, and many would-be initiates set out on great quests to find the Rosicrucian Brotherhood and join their ranks. Untold numbers of letters and applications were sent to suspected members of the Invisible Brotherhood, and many texts were later anonymously written or collated and attributed to the Rosicrucians. This was the beginning of a Rosicrucian movement, whose effects would be felt for at least the next 200 years. Yet the issue of singling out individual or groups of Rosicrucians was near impossible, since they were invisible. In other words, anonymous. If one claimed to be a Rosicrucian, it was surely proof that they were not. A Rosicrucian and Freemasonry connection had insinuated itself since at least the 1600s. With many esotericist intellectuals and prominent Masons such as Sir Robert Moray and Elias Ashmole being more than casually interested in Rosicrucianism and Kabbalah, it was not very long before several Freemasonic iterations of Rosicrucianism began cropping up. Of these, we find arguably the best examples apropos the Golden Dawn in the Orden Golden Rosenkreuz, a non-Masonic organization founded in the 1750s by a German Freemason working under the pseudonym Hermann Fichtel. Despite its non-Masonic status, membership to this order required one be a Master Mason in good standing, and its aims and teachings were specifically alchemical. It is from this order and its subsequent derivatives which the Golden Dawn grade structure and titles were imported. Also, it is from these explicitly Rosicrucian bodies which the Golden Dawn derived its Rosicrucian inner order. In fact, it is absolutely impossible to talk about the Golden Dawn in any meaningful way without also discussing Rosicrucianism. The Golden Rosenkreuz, or Order of the Gold and Rosy Cross, was in fact a precursor to the Masonic invitational body, the SRIA, Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, the Rosicrucian Society in England, founded in 1865 by Robert Wentworth Little. The Rosicrucian mythos, ethos, and grade structure, along with its attendant titles, were imported from the Order of the Gold and Rosy Cross, and it is this Masonic-affiliated Rosicrucian body that all three founders of the Golden Dawn were members of. The SRIA was notedly an esoteric or mystic Christian organization within Masonry. The elder statesman of esoteric orders of the three chiefs of the Golden Dawn was Dr. William Robert Woodman, who was Grand Sword Bearer of the United Grand Lodge of England and occupied a high rank in esoteric Masonic orders. He was Supreme Magus of the SRIA, a title denoting the highest administrative officer, until his death in 1891. Upon Woodman's death, Westcott was named his successor as Supreme Magus of the SRIA. It was rumored that within the SRIA there was a small group of initiates meeting under the name of the Society of Eight. This was to be a society of devoted esotericists, a society within a society, pursuing esoteric work. However, it is unknown whether or not this group ever truly materialized to any great effect. However, there are extant in private collections certain notes corresponding to work done with the 22 tarot trumps of the major arcana and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which just a few decades earlier were corresponded in the works of Antoine Coeur de Gebelin, a French Mason, and the Comte de Millet. Some of these are believed to be in Westcott's handwriting. However, it remains unknown as to whether or not these were affiliated with the work done in the Society of Eight, because Westcott was explicitly slated to be passed over for membership by the Society's founder. The figures surrounding this group are of key significance to the era just before the founding of the Golden Dawn. The Society of Eight was to be populated by prominent hand-picked esoteric Masons. Esoteric Masons, here meaning Masons deeply interested and involved with what was considered the quote-unquote occult, particularly in the study of Kabbalah and the practice of scrying. These were Kenneth Mackenzie and Frederick Hockley. Mackenzie is important in the formation of the Golden Dawn in several ways, perhaps not least by being extremely important in Rosicrucian Masonry. He's a character continually orbiting the sphere of fringe and esoteric Masonic occultism, magic, and Rosicrucianism throughout the mid-1800s in England and in France. A linguist and prolific and highly lauded translator, Mackenzie also penned the Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, a monumental and classic work which collated esoteric interpretations of Masonic symbolism, incorporating Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, alchemy, astrology, and other elements of occultism into a unified encyclopedic Masonic text. Mackenzie was also heavily involved with Rosicrucian Masonry. In 1854, he met with Pascal Beverly Randolph, the American Rosicrucian and later Supreme Grand Master of the Fraternitas Rosicrucis, the oldest Rosicrucian order in America. Mackenzie would go on to collaborate with Robert Wentworth Little in the formation of the S.D.A, and Westcott later claimed that Mackenzie had been given special dispensation for the order's formation by an Austrian high initiate named Count Apony, and from whom Mackenzie was supposed to have received quote-unquote Rosicrucian initiation. In 1861, Mackenzie visited with French occultist, author, and one-time Freemason Eliphas Levi. Frederick Hockley was considered by many to be a primary formative influence on the curriculum of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as he collected and transcribed a vast amount of books on occult subjects. It is believed he learned crystallomancy or crystal gazing from a pupil of Francis Barrett, who wrote the Magus. Some researchers have suggested it was Hockley who fleshed out the documents, which ended up becoming the Golden Dawn rituals and curriculum, and point out significance in his being a mentor to Mackenzie. Several other influential figures in Rosicrucian Freemasonry included Elias Ashmole, Edward Bulwer Lytton, Francis George Irwin, and a group of fringe Masons known as the S.D.A, whom were highly influenced by Mackenzie's work. In this we see a tapestry of European occultism expanding before our very eyes, significant in size and intricate. Most significantly, Kenneth Mackenzie was for many years believed to be the most probable candidate for the origins, whether in their actual transcription or by mere possession of the foundational documents known as the Cipher manuscripts. William Wynne Westcott was a celebrated translator and esoteric Mason, as well as a coroner of the Crown of England in the City of London. He was considered by many of his contemporaries as a worthy scholar of esotericism and related religious currents. He was appointed successor to Woodman after the latter's death and became Supreme Magus for the S.D.A. In 1878, Westcott took a 2-year sabbatical from his profession to study the Kabbalah and Hermeticism almost exclusively. He also served as master of the Quattuor Coronati Research Lodge and gave frequent lectures to the Theosophical Society, the Hermetic Society, and contributed to all manner of esoteric publications and organizations within his sphere of influence. He was indeed a prolific writer and orator in esoteric circles of his day. Samuel Little Mathers was a young Freemason from no special background or upbringing. He struggled for most of his life to make a decent living and had trouble holding down jobs due to his quixotic and flamboyant nature. He was considered by most who knew him to be a well-intentioned eccentric. The Irish poet and Golden Dawn initiate William Butler Yeats once remarked that Mathers was a man of, quote, great learning and little scholarship, much imagination, but imperfect taste. The two great obsessions of his life were occult learning and amateur martial pursuits. In a reminiscence written in the Occult Review in 1919 of Mathers, we find a colorful description. Quote, he remained a denizen of the reading room. I met him one morning wearing a scarlet tie, to which he pointed proudly because it was assumed as a symbol of his fighting instincts, which he had proved unable to gratify in any more practical manner. We encountered on another occasion, he staggering as usual under a load of books, and he said, I have clothed myself with hieroglyphics as with a garment. So I inferred that he was then deep in Egyptology. He had a natural faculty for suggesting in his mystery language that he had a most profound acquaintance with any subject he took up, and it went a long way with the universe. End quote. Sam Mathers was raised a Master Mason in January of 1878 and became a member of the Metropolitan College of the S.D.A. in 1882. Mina Bergson, sister of Nobel Prize-winning philosopher Henri Bergson, was a student at the Slade School of Fine Art, where she met her good friend and future fellow initiate Annie Horniman, daughter of the wealthy tea importer and founder of the Horniman Museum, Frederick John Horniman. Mina met Sam Mathers in 1887 and remarked to her friend Annie that she definitely did not want to marry him. They were married shortly after, however, and not long after this, Mina became known as Moina. Throughout their lives together, Annie remained a faithful friend and benefactor to the Matherses, as well as to the order, until a bitter falling out in 1896. Mina and Sam were two parts of one whole, deeply in love, and profoundly bonded on a level of metaphysical reality. They spend much of their time together undertaking visionary experiments and developing their abilities to maintain states which far transcended normal waking consciousness. While both laying claim to clairvoyant abilities, it is apparently Moina who was the stronger, and through the both of them came much of the ritual brilliance and the inner order curriculum. Sam was known to astonish people with his ability to perform magical feats. The actress and Golden Dawn initiate Florence Farr writes of him touching her upon the forehead and sending her into a state resembling involuntary astral projection. W.B. Yeats wrote of a scrying experiment undertaken with the Matherses, where he was shocked to find that all three of them were having the exact same visionary experience. Also, Yeats describes Sam Mathers as giving him a cardboard symbol and instructing him to close his eyes. Quote, there rose before me mental images that I could not control. A desert and black Titan raising himself up by his two hands from the middle of a heap of ancient ruins. Along with these and many other experiments, both recorded and otherwise, were communications with certain entities. These have been referred to by several terms. Moina seems to have referred to them as teachers, stating that her husband Sam's, quote, teachers instructed him to found an occult school at about the date of his first edition of the Kabbalah Unveiled, which he translated in 1887. She goes on to say, quote, the literature of this school was written by my husband. In 1888, my husband started the working of his esoteric school, end quote. Yeats also describes contact with entities of this same nature later on in his life, specifically using the word teachers. Quote, almost all communications came in that way. My teachers did not seem to speak out of her sleep, but as if from above it, as though it were a tide upon which they floated, end quote. Aside from potentially disembodied teachers, the Golden Dawn was influenced by several key figures. Mathers was involved in several theosophical-based organizations, here specifically meaning the Theosophical Society, which had success in America in the 1870s and made its way, though less well known there initially, to England in the 1880s. The Theosophical Society of the time was headed by William Quan Judge, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, and the de facto theosophical head herself, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The theosophical writings of Blavatsky and derivative influences would be tremendous on Mathers and impart him with a considerably unique lifestyle. For one, he was a staunch vegetarian and anti-vivisectionist, as well as a non-smoker. These were all unique things for a man of his particular place and time. However, they were ideals which had gained notoriety and popularity among theosophical circles. One such extremely vocal and pragmatic theosophist was Anna Bonus Kingsford, who was the president of the London Lodge of the Theosophical Society. After some controversial findings regarding the Theosophical Society in 1884, Kingsford resigned from her position and from the society, forming her Hermetic Society with her partner Edward Maitland. This was a precursor to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in many ways. Kingsford was an activist for women's rights and a virulent opponent of vivisection. Kingsford was also principally interested in esoteric Christianity. However, she writes in her diary of having psychically killed certain prominent scientists by means of a psychic thought projection for crimes against animals in the name of human science and progress. She avers her next target to be Louis Pasteur, writing just after the death of Paul Bert in 1886, quote, "I have killed Paul Bert, as I killed Claude Bernard, as I will kill Louis Pasteur, and after him the whole tribe of vivisectors, if I live long enough. It is a magnificent power to have, and the one that transcends all vulgar methods of dealing out justice to tyrants." End quote. It was later claimed by Edward Maitland that her attempt to kill Louis Pasteur failed. Nonetheless, her influence was extremely strong on Mathers in particular, though he and Westcott both served as lecturers to the Hermetic Society. Sam himself became a student of Kingsford, dedicating his translation of the Kabbalah Unveiled to her. Westcott eulogized Kingsford, saying she was, quote, "illuminated by the sun of light." The theosophical influence is significant in another way to modern researchers. When a reader, whether casual or initiated, approaches the foundational circulars, memorandums, and instructional documents of the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn, which are known as the Flying Rolls, they're typically confronted with a mass of vague, obscure, and archaic words and terms, jargon. We are inclined to quote-unquote fill in the blanks, making our own immediate interpretations and interpolations for the sake of navigating these texts to their respective ends. However, these many terms had highly specific meanings and usages and were common parlance among the theosophical circles of the day. The Theosophical Society's greater body of literature in fact generated an entire vernacular tantamount to a lexicon or technical jargon of spiritual science. Without this understanding, even a careful reading of the core materials of the Golden Dawn, particularly the Flying Rolls, are without significant context. Westcott was himself a personal friend of Madame Blavatsky and delivered a eulogy of her as well to the local Theosophical Lodge after her death. He and Mathers also became members of the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society in 1888. This was a special branch of the Theosophical Society which was chartered by Colonel Olcott and H.P.B. herself. According to a circular on the esoteric section's formation, it had been constituted, quote, "to promote the esoteric interests of the Theosophical Society by the deeper study of esoteric philosophy," end quote. The widespread influence the Theosophical Society had over mainstream consciousness of its day simply cannot be overstated, yet somehow it remains a largely unknown fact. The 16th and 17th century German philosopher and shoemaker Jakob Boehme is also a lesser suspected influence on the system of the Golden Dawn. Boehme was a Lutheran theologian and Christian mystic. He had a series of mystical visions in which certain spiritual truths were revealed to him. His writings, taking place 12 years after his visions, formed the basis for what was termed Christian theosophy, in which he described alchemical allegories and symbolic images within a narrative of the creation of God out of himself, composed of darkness and of light. One such of these influential works is entitled The Aurora, the Dawn. There are several diagrams of central importance to the Golden Dawn initiatory system and curriculum which echo or directly mirror several accompanying diagrams within Boehme's work, having to do with the nature of fallen creation and its redemption or reintegration. This term reintegration is very familiar to Martinist circles because it is a term used frequently in the works of the unknown philosopher, Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. Saint Martin regarded Jacobum as one of his two spiritual masters, the other being Martine de Pasquale. We will find that there was cross-pollination between Martinist and Golden Dawn orders, particularly in Paris of the early 20th century. From a lecture given by Mathers to the Golden Dawn, quote, "The Martinists, as long as they adhere to the teachings of their founder, should not be out of harmony with the RR et AC." End quote. Much of the system of correspondences and practical magical theurgy of the Golden Dawn was culled from the works of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, particularly his books on occult philosophy. A large amount of the Golden Dawn outer order material also comes from the work of Alphonse Louis Constant, better known as Eliphas Levi Zahed or Eliphas Levi, specifically the Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, which he penned in the 1850s. Mathers references Eliphas Levi as having been a fellow initiate of the Golden Dawn. It's important to note that the Golden Dawn, despite all the different magical techniques and skills studied and acquired as part of its course of study, is patently a system of magical, alchemical, initiatic spiritual development. In other words, theurgy, and it is explicitly referred to as such repeatedly by its founders. In theosophical and kindred circles, the rumors of an occult order making great pretenses were abroad in those days. Obscure persons were placing cryptic sigils after their names in unexpected communications. Dark hints were conveyed in breathless murmurs. Rough customers from the lowlands of Scotland talked about strange things in the modern world. In 1888, a charter was signed, effectively giving full birth to the Golden Dawn. Early on, Westcott maintained that Reverend Woodford, whom is often cited as the unofficial fourth founder of the Golden Dawn, and whom Westcott purported to have received the Cipher manuscripts from, had encouraged him to make contact with a Fräulein Sprengel, whom was assumed to be associated with the manuscripts, and the German Rosicrucian order, which was the institutional basis for the Golden Dawn. Westcott referred to this order as the Golden Dämmerung. He successfully began correspondence with Frau Sprengel, who signed her letters as Soror S.D.A, Sapiens Dominabitur Astris, the wise shall conquer the stars. In her correspondence, she instructs him to, quote, "Write to me under cover of the secretary of the lodge Licht Lieb Lieben, which address you know." This correspondence was presented as granting Mathers, Westcott, and Woodman specific grades which allowed them to confer initiation and to open and run a temple of the Golden Dawn, chartered in London, under dispensation by Soror S.D.A. This kind of official paper trail was a kind of pedigree of the society. The newly installed chief signed the beautifully designed charter for Isis Urania Temple No. 3, with what are called magical mottos, words or phrases in Latin, Hebrew, or Greek typically, which are selected by the initiate to be referred to by among the initiated, as well as in adopting an invocatory formula. Moina Mathers was the Golden Dawn's first initiate to be put through the outer order. This distinction is significant in that the Golden Dawn was an outer court and mystery school which prepared initiation for possible entry into the inner Rosicrucian order, the RR et AC, Rosai Rube et Aurea Crucis. This inner order was not, however, in full manifestation until 1892. A significant feature of the Golden Dawn was its admission of men and women on equal basis. Not merely admission, but enthusiastic encouragement of and accessibility to either sexes to real contribution within the order. Moina imparted several significant contributions to the order. She was an extremely gifted clairvoyant, and along with her husband Sam, using a method known as the ring and disc, channeled much of the inner order curriculum of magic. Being a former art student, she created the scheme of color magic, which is part and parcel of the Adeptus Minor curriculum and the Rosicrucian magic of the Inner Order. She adorned the temple implements with splendid imagery, beautifying the temple space and leaving behind wonderful works of Golden Dawn art. She also wrote papers, delivered lectures, and taught clairvoyance. Many of these lessons and study aids are still in use in the modern Golden Dawn communities. She took on serious responsibilities. She was essentially the unofficial fourth chief and most senior initiate. Her motto was Vestigia nulla retrorsum, I leave no trace behind, or I do not retrace my steps. Aside from the scant remnants of her Golden Dawn and artistic work, this was largely true. Very little of personal record is extant of either of the Matherses. There were many other highly influential women in the first class of the Golden Dawn. Annie Horniman essentially kept the Golden Dawn alive by way of support, both administratively and financially. She founded the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, Ireland, and essentially brought repertory theatre to Britain. She was seen as a mother figure to the Isis Urania Temple group and was perhaps the leader with most vision for the temple. Florence Farr, the famous actress and muse, was also a leading figure among the Adepti of the Inner Order. She founded an inner circle with highly unique work called the Sphere Group. She beautified Golden Dawn ritual with her insistence that movement and speech within ceremonial should be as in a dramatic play, graceful and musical. She pioneered a method of vibrating words and divine names which she called cantillating. She was also foremost among the Adepti to assume a position of leadership and responsibility. Maud Gonne, a legendary figure in her own time within the Irish revolutionary movement, was only briefly a member, but so inspired many of the other initiates, such as William Butler Yeats, as to have left a lasting imprint in multiple streams of 19th and early 20th century history. With Yeats, she founded a Celtic outcropping, a potential outgrowth of the Golden Dawn's Hermetic Kabbalistic magic, though it remained mostly an outline. Pamela Colman Smith, whose beautiful artwork brought to life the Rider-Waite-Smith collaboration of the publication of the Tarot. Her artistic talents brought Waite's vision and symbolic arrangements to birth, which artistic contribution is at least 50% responsible for the deck's success. Other prominent members of the early class were the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, the scholar Arthur Edward Waite, who designed the prototypical and classic Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, the translator Percy Bullock, noted alchemist and elder statesman of Hermeticism W.A. Ayton, Edward Berridge, Dr. Robert Felkin, J.W. Brodie Innes, and the authors Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood. The Golden Dawn was known as the Order of the Golden Dawn in the Outer at that time, and as mentioned before was a quote-unquote First Order or Outer Court, concealing an inner Rosicrucian order of Adepti doing practical magic. We find the Outer Order, however, consisting of the accumulation and assimilation of the necessary prerequisite faculties and information systems, which enabled one to practice Golden Dawn magic effectively. It was like a preparatory school for the higher magical learning of the Inner or Second Order. Among their courses of study were Tarot, a card deck of which had to be handcrafted personally by each initiate according to specific tarot correspondence guidelines, natal and horary astrology. The casting and interpretation of charts was another topic of which much study was made. The memorization by rote of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, their corresponding themes, sounds, and figures, as well as astrological and alchemical symbolism. These acted as symbolic vocabularies which were being assimilated into the initiate's sphere of sensation, a Western term coined by the Inner Order Adepti to refer more holistically to the energetic and psycho-spiritual organism of the individual, inclusive of the aura. These symbolic vocabularies allowed initiates to reliably extract and interpret data from the inner planes by both increasing and specifying their available imagery banks. Scrying of the tattvas and development of tattva vision was also given as early as the 1=10 grade of Zalater. The lesser ritual of the pentagram was also given. In fact, this ritual was created by the founders of the Golden Dawn. However, the invoking ritual was preferred, whereas in more recent days the banishing version tends to be overused. This is also in modern times confused for an elemental ritual. However, the attribution of the various archangels to the cardinal directions is actually based on the four winds and their qualities, therefore making this primarily a directional ritual. This form of directional invocation has historical roots as early as the first few centuries BCE in esoteric Taoist magical practice. The original imagery of the archangels were as pillars of light, with their elemental color correspondences and attendant regalia only coming into play later on. The nature of the outer order formula of ritual in the Golden Dawn was considered to be one of spiritual alchemy, a salve et coagula formula, wherein the initiate was the matter to be transformed. Through several elemental grades ascribed to the Tree of Life, the candidate was initiated and advanced through a system of alchemical initiatic magic, passing through each grade with each ritual and attendant correspondences and attributions to the various elements and Sephiroth, purifying and consecrating each in turn. I like to say that in the outer order the magic is done to you, whereas in the inner order you do the magic. It is only after the initiate has completed the rigorous process of alchemical initiation through the elements in the outer that they may, if the chief so chose, be invited into the grade of 5 = 6, corresponding to the Kabbalistic Sephirah of Tiferet. This schematic was essentially fleshed out in large part, at least in accordance with the neophyte ritual, which in itself implied nearly the entire scheme of subsequent initiation, in a series of documents referred to as the Z documents, written several years after the founding of the Golden Dawn by Sam Mathers. They are a complete explanation of the formula of the Golden Dawn and the Golden Dawn's magic of the light. This utilized a technique known as the Assumption of God forms and introduced the study and use of the Coptic alphabet into the Golden Dawn system of the higher grades. It is extremely heavy on visualization. The inner or second order of the Golden Dawn was called the Ordo Rosae Rubia et Aurea Crucis, the Order of the Ruby Rose and Cross of Gold, and was explicitly Rosicrucian in nature. The various magical implements crafted, consecrated, and used, rituals performed, and tasks to be completed in the inner order were explicitly secondary to the work of theurgy, whose goal for the adepti of the RR et AC was explicitly being raised and united with their divine higher genius. The higher genius is often conflated, largely by way of Edward Alexander Crowley, with the holy guardian angel. This had to do with Crowley's very brief, intense, and uncomfortable foray in the Golden Dawn during a time of strife and schism. Also, while Mathers was attempting to publish his translation of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, which references the holy guardian angel. Higher divine genius, however, is a term ultimately derived from the translations of the Platonic and Neoplatonic corpus available at that time. Thomas Taylor translated the word daimon as genius rather than demon. For good reason. Daimon does not mean demon as we understand the word. Rather, it was a guiding or tutelary spirit. While the higher divine genius and the holy guardian angel appear to be similar, there is an important difference. For this we look to the Platonic scholarch Proclus. In his commentary on Plato's Parmenides, the distinction is made that the daimon can be viewed and experienced as both an interior and an exterior reality. The tendency with the holy guardian angel is to exteriorize it as a separate entity, whereas the higher divine genius is often experienced on a more interior level. Needless to say, each person has their own experience of these entities, but this concept and distinction can be important. The angelic sessions of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly also come heavily into play within the Golden Dawn system of magic. At a certain point, Dee was searching for a way to communicate with angels, and he hired a seer and alchemist, Edward Kelly, also then known to be a con man, but extremely gifted seer. They began their scrying sessions in which Kelly communicated with various angelic intelligences in vision and received instructions for various ritual implements including tables, sigils, banners, and even an entire angelic language with its own consistent syntax. Through various twists and turns, Dee records these angelical conversations in his notebooks. Much of these are preserved in the British Museum. He claims that the angelic language was given to the biblical patriarch Enoch by an angel named Ave, hence the term Enochian. While the Golden Dawn utilizes the angelic or Enochian language and a comprehensive system of tablature derived from the watchtowers of Dee and Kelly's experiments, the traditional system of angelic magic as recorded in the journals Dee kept differs significantly from the system as developed by the founders of the Golden Dawn. Florence Farr was an extremely active and innovative adept of the Inner Order. Among her many other contributions to the Golden Dawn, while perusing the British Museum one day in 1895, Farr quote-unquote made contact with an Egyptian adept who communicated with her through both a statue and a preserved mummified body. She used these artifacts as points of astral contact with what she believed to be Egyptian adepti of past eons. Here we see again this idea of disembodied teachers, communicating by supernatural means. These were also known as secret chiefs. Theosophically, they were referred to as masters. This idea was largely popularized by Helena Blavatsky in her Theosophical writings. She taught that it was through such masters that she had received instruction from a very early age telepathically. She wrote, quote, "They are living men, born as we are born, and doomed to die like every mortal. We call them masters because they are our teachers, and because from them we have derived all the theosophical truths. They are men of great learning, whom we call initiates, and still greater holiness of life." End quote. The idea of ascended teachers reaching out telepathically to communicate and instruct us became very popular during the years following the spiritualist movement that set the stage for and gave birth to the worldwide Theosophical movement. It came to the point where Blavatsky's successors deigned to revise her teachings shortly after her death under claimed authority of having gotten in contact with their own masters. This perhaps unfortunate trend would typify occult workings for the next century at least. It finds its reflection in New Age concepts like spirit guides. In 1890, a letter came to Westcott from a frater ex uno disces omnis, informing him of the death of Sor S.D.A. The letter also informed Westcott that though the Sor had granted them a charter for Isis Urania No. 3, the other chiefs of the order opposed her doing so. The letter unequivocally stated to the temple, basically, "You're on your own." In 1891, the third chief, William Robert Woodman, died, leaving a vacancy in the governing triad between Mathers and Westcott that would never again be filled, creating appreciable tension over time. The following year, 1892, Sam and Moina moved to Paris. This tension between the two chiefs would mount until 1896, when some of Westcott's Golden Dawn papers were mysteriously found left in a pedicab. He was confronted by local authorities and somewhat reprimanded, as this business was not considered something befitting a coroner of the crown. He was forced to completely step down as second chief of the order, leaving Mathers as sole chief. In 1897, after several translations of other works, Sam Mathers endeavored to translate a book called The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. The book, in and of itself from which this translation was culled, consists of 12 manuscripts published as 4 volumes, detailing the discovery of a form of powerful Kabbalistic magic, culminating in the appearance of one's holy guardian angel. Mathers completed a partial translation. It was during this time that things began to unravel. This period of Mathers' attempt to have the translation published, as well as details surrounding the Golden Dawn, was fraught with miscommunication, missed connections, calamity, and generally ill fortune. While in Paris, Mathers began to become possessed of various political ideas, and embroiled himself in certain machinations of a vague nature, but implying some form of political intrigue. He began writing often about financial forecasts in very hushed and urgent tones, and became invested in and identified with Jacobite political movements, having earlier adopted the moniker MacGregor from a very early age, and from a very early age identifying himself with the Scotch clan MacGregor, later assuming the title Comte de Glenstray, Count of Glenstray. He suffered several bicycle accidents during this time as well. During visits to their Paris apartment, W.B. Yeats records that Mathers looked emaciated. In the following year, Sam Mathers initiated Edward Alexander Crowley into the Order of the Golden Dawn in the Outer. By 1899, he had completed the Outer Order under Mathers' wing and with his favor. This was a trajectory of initiation that was and still is recommended take somewhere around 3 years. Crowley was put through it in 1. As an editorial, this can be either catastrophic for the psychoetheric makeup or unremarkable as nothing having any real effect. But in any event, it is seemingly irresponsible, and this is indeed one of the very rare instances where Crowley is not to be blamed. However, owing to his diffuse proclivity to imbalance, Crowley was generally disfavored for progression to the Inner Order and barred by the chiefs of the London Temple, particularly by Florence Farr, who was, it is worth noting, not considered prudish in her own day. Earlier, Crowley had made the acquaintance of a young chemist, Julian Baker, and through him, George Cecil Jones, both of whom were members of the Golden Dawn. While Crowley was just a beginner in the occult arts, Jones, also an amateur chemist and advanced member of the Inner Order, began experimenting with chemistry, discussing ritual, and studying through magical tomes. This may have had something to do with Crowley's disappointment when, through introduction by Jones, he was initiated into the Golden Dawn and given his curriculum of study. He expressed that he had, quote, pledged himself to secrecy with terrific oaths and then found himself entrusted with the Hebrew alphabet. Crowley also formed a relationship with Alan Bennett, another Golden Dawn initiate, after his admission to the Second Order. It was with Bennett that Crowley began his real magical experimentation, crafting talismans, performing rites of evocation, and all manner of serious and intense magical workings of the Inner Order, if perhaps prematurely for his specific grade. Yet for all his early sincerity and his youthful devil-may-care rebelliousness, Crowley grew imminently dissatisfied with the Order, in large part due to the unraveling of the head of the Order who had taken him under his wing. It was during this time that Crowley was exposed, by way of Mathers, to the Abramelin translation and to the concept of the Holy Guardian Angel, which Crowley then erroneously conflated with the Inner Order teaching of the higher divine genius. After Mathers admitted and initiated Crowley to the 5=6 at his Ahator Temple in Paris in 1900, against the wishes of the chiefs of the London Temple, Florence Farr wrote to notify Mathers of her resignation. It was at this time that Mathers wrote back claiming that the Sprengel letters were forgeries of Westcott, that he had been under an oath of secrecy to Westcott, and that, quote, every atom of knowledge, end quote, came to the Order through him, Mathers alone. This caused a full-fledged rebellion. Despite Mathers' direction to not mention what he had disclosed to her to the others, Farr felt an obligation to tell them, and a formal investigative committee was formed. However, not much further information was gleaned, as Westcott made no strong defense of his own case, but brushed the accusation off with a degree of vagueness and ambiguity, and Mathers patently refused to discuss the matter any further, nor acknowledge the committee as having any kind of authority. Through a circuitous series of events, a schism was enacted, with Mathers taking with him a handful of loyalists and the London Temple claiming its own autonomy. Initially, Crowley was sent as a lapdog and emissary to collect papers and certain pieces of property from the location of the London Temple, then at 36 Blythe Road. What ensued has been called the Battle of Blythe Road, with Crowley showing up masked in Scottish tartan and wielding one or more blades. He was, however, ousted and escorted away by the police. Around this time, and slightly later, it becomes apparent in his diaries that Crowley began to severely resent Mathers after having first pledged and confessed his fealty to him. He eventually left the Golden Dawn as it fell upon scandal, and bringing further disgrace and enmity upon the Order by later publishing its rituals and maliciously caricaturing its members in his series, The Equinox. Israel Regardie once wrote, quote, knowing his nature, I was always surprised when he spoke well of a man. End quote. Crowley also intentionally plagiarized Order documents. Within the Golden Dawn, curriculum was not copied and given to students, but rather circulated among students for them to copy. There were many of these documents and manuscripts which served as inter-order memos and master copies, one of which was a document which served as both quasi-encyclopedic and quick reference guide to correspondences of all manner of materia, mythology, astrology, and Kabbalistic knowledge. to which Crowley appended a few commentaries dubbed 777 and published privately with his own name as the author. Eventually, his intense disillusionment soured into further resentment and hatred. He recorded a reminder to himself in his diary that he should find someone to, quote-unquote, do the job of getting rid of Mathers. He haunted Mathers at every turn, eventually leading him to a court battle that made public display of the Golden Dawn Order in 1910 for a second time. The main point to keep in mind, really, is that Crowley would further caricature the entirety of the Golden Dawn system, which is predicated on a dynamic equilibrium referred to as the path of the middle pillar, and which is nearly entirely based on the Osirian Christic mythos of the dying and resurrecting God as a formula for spiritual transmutation, which we find, and have found since time immemorial, analogized by the cycles of the sun. This as in a physical analog or patterned reflection alluding to a greater metaphysical principle or truth. Crowley inverted this theme in several ways, first by advocating extremism, not in the motto of his religion of Thelema, do what thou wilt, but rather in advocating to members an immersion in either vice or total abstinence depending on their disposition. No matter what he was attempting to accomplish, this is antithetical to the Golden Dawn system of equilibration, as it was practiced and promulgated in the original order. We have this in writing from the Flying Rolls and Letters. He also attempted to destroy the formula of the quote-unquote old gods and supplant it with the new, the Aeon of Horus, the crowned and conquering child. Talk about an embodied formula. As a consequence of this schism and subsequent revolt, Mathers was ousted by his London adepti. Arthur Edward Waite ended up with control of Isis Urania, and Dr. Falcon obtained leadership over a new splinter order consisting of several adepti, which was then called the Stella Matutina, or Star of the Morning. The Matherses had developed a network of initiates and took part in many esoteric salons, even initiating into the Martinist order of Gerard Ancos, or Papus, and in turn initiating him into their Golden Dawn temple. They performed public rites of Isis in Paris as well, taking leading parts in the ritual drama. They were primed to continue forward with certain adepti who remained loyal to Mathers, particular J.W. Brodie Innes, who eventually became his successor for a time, and also for a short time at least, Dr. Falcon. On the heels of this schism, a final death blow was to be delivered to whatever extant ruins of the Golden Dawn were discernible. Around 1900, Mathers was approached by a woman named Madame Horos, and her husband, Theo Horos. They ingratiated themselves with Sam Mathers, but were a couple of con artists who had left the States and entered Europe, having left a trail of deception and ill repute behind them. They found in Mathers a mark, and once earning his trust under the pretense of being the real Anna Sprengel and or reincarnated Madame Blavatsky, stole a slew of order papers, including ceremonies. 18 months later, in 1901, Theo Horos was on trial for rape, with his wife as accomplice. The Golden Dawn was implicated when they attempted to use the Golden Dawn and the papers that they had in their possession to cover the crime up. The court hearing exposed the Golden Dawn. Its documents were revealed and seized upon by the press, and the Golden Dawn's mystique was gone in a flash. They had made headlines. Many members, completely disillusioned in the Order's fate, resigned, left, or went completely off radar. The Matherses changed the name of their splinter order in Paris to the Alpha et Omega, stating that the order was formerly called the Golden Dawn, but the name was abandoned after it had been profaned, yet they hoped to one day again reinstate the title. It was never to be so. Just over a decade later, the First World War came. Golden Dawn adepti and initiates met in small groups, attempting to keep the orders alive, with many attempting to make sense of the tragic trajectory of this illuminated order, whose crest was ridden by those intrepid bohemian believers in magic and transmutation. and though the wave broke and rolled back, it would only return to its source, to issue forth once again in a new but familiar form, a glint from the light underneath the surface shining through, as if in reassurance that the impetus for the order was indeed, as they might say, from beyond the veil. During Mather's coup of the order, he revealed to the actress Florence Farr that Westcott had forged the letters between himself and Fraulein Sprengels, and had never been in contact with any chiefs of the order. This is often cited as a reason to discredit the entire stream of Golden Dawn legitimacy from the outset. However, we find contradictory evidence both before and after this incident, in Mather's claiming to be in contact himself with the chiefs of the order. However, his claim was that the chiefs were not necessarily your average individuals existing within some sort of German lodge. Rather, Mathers was in touch with secret chiefs who occupied an existence of perhaps willed embodiment and disembodiment. His constant refrain to his close associates was that to be in their presence and under their guidance was a strain that he believed would eventually kill him. Mathers goes on to say that every atom of the order's curriculum and knowledge came to it through him, and that he had been the one in touch with the real secret chiefs. So we see here not a denial of the existence of any chiefs, or of the legitimacy of the Cipher manuscripts, but that, to Mathers' mind, Westcott was never in contact with them. In fact, during the Horos scandal, Mathers admitted that he believed Madame Horos to have been the real Fraulein Sprengel. This could not be possible if he didn't believe in her existence. Recent research and erudition have revealed some interesting facts pertaining to the possible origin and transmission of German Rosicrucian lines to other parts of Europe. Specifically, in a lecture given by Westcott to the order on the history of the Golden Dawn, he states the following, quote, "This temple, Isis Urania No. 3, was consecrated as a successor to Hermanubis Temple No. 2, which had ceased to exist owing to the death of all its chiefs. The Temple No. 1 of Licht Lieb Lieben is a group of continental mystics who have not been in the habit of performing ceremonies in open lodge, but have conferred the grades chiefly in privacy and in the presence of 2 or 3 members." End quote. Till a handful of years ago, this mother lodge, Licht Lieb Lieben, was thought to have been an invention of Westcott. However, recent research has revealed the existence of a lodge with such name. In the Lodge Journal of German Freemasonry, Volume 10 of 1867, there is explicit mention of a lodge, Licht Lieb Lieben. What is very interesting here is the explicit mention that this lodge was irregular or clandestine because of its divergence from regular accepted Masonic ritual. The Lütbecker, made mention of in the Lodge Journal, was a philosophy teacher and author who penned a work entitled The Essenes, a sketch for theologians and Freemasons, which expresses his thesis of the Judaic sect of the Essenes, the early Christians, and the Therapeutai of ancient Alexandria belonging to one continuous spiritual tradition. Within this work, he associates Freemasonry as a vehicle for the esoteric spiritual traditions of ancient Christians, Hellenistic philosophies, and Egyptian rites simultaneously. Further, Dr. Robert Falcon struck out in a dire quest after the Schism to find the chiefs of the Golden Dawn in continental Europe. His search lasted several years and was an adventure unto itself. Through a circuitous and at times extremely dangerous and simultaneously unproductive series of inquiries, Falcon found what he believed unequivocally to be the Rosicrucian chiefs he was looking for. And they were found in Germany. It would seem, then, if we were to indulge in the suspension of any disbelief, that Mather's teachers had been guiding him the whole time. A group of entities that used him as a vehicle for the formation of the order and seemingly abandoned him when he was no longer of use. Both he and his wife allude to his teachers commissioning him to this work before the translation of the Cipher manuscripts. final curious feature regarding the ciphers, Fräulein Sprengel, and chiefs from beyond the material plane is that the magical motto written on the charter supposedly issued by Fräulein Sprengel, as well as mentioned in other instances, including lectures and memorandums, was Soror S.D.A, Sapiens Dominabitur Astris. This was the magical motto of a Fräulein Anna Sprengel, their chief and chartering adept. Yet this very magical motto was attached to someone else, another woman who acted as an adept mentor and influencer of the Golden Dawn, Anna Bonus Kingsford. This magical motto was found inscribed on the inside of her edition of Theologized Astrology, found in her library after her death. Sapiens Dominabitur Astris, S.D.A. If you've enjoyed this content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Arcanum Patreon. For the cost of a cup of coffee per month, you can help me continue to produce free, rigorously researched and practiced material like this. Patreon members also have access to bonus content, including episode addendums and my Egypt travel vlog, as well as other goodies, such as being able to ask guests a question for the podcast. Please continue to watch, like, comment, and share. If you're not in the position to contribute financially, there are always plenty of ways to help me keep the Arcanum channel alive and well. Join me again in the next episode where we'll dive deeper into the history, theory, and practice of this and many other related topics. Thanks for watching. In Luke's.